So yeah, all of this stuff, we're on the up. We are seeing Newport now increasing in importance, and one of the main sort of reasons for this at this time, by the sort of 18th century, we're starting to see the whole of the kind of south coast really being used as a garrison. So Newport was by this time a garrison town. You could almost argue the Isle of Wight was a garrison in itself. We've got encampments here of soldiers all the way out along what would become Forest Road here. You can see all the names here, and this is just a part of a map that again is held by the County Records Service, and you can see that if you go down there. I think they're open again now, which is great. But it just kind of shows that all of the area surrounding Newport, sort of to the north and west, was encampments of soldiers. So we really did need to be able to feed all of these, which meant then that we had an increase in agricultural production, increased trade, being able to kind of local merchants supplying all of these as well, which made them prosperous, and we get that kind of chain of people supplying and then getting richer, I guess, on that fact. We've got evidence that, you know, again, that we know these soldiers. This is another Thomas Rowlandson picture of the soldiers within Newport there. And we also know at this time that several of the mills along the Medina, which there was, you know, quite a lot all the way down through to its source, and the Lukeley Brook itself. We've got certainly inside Newport itself 4 mills that are increased in size, and this is the one that we can still see today at Pan Mill, which in order to process all of the extra grain that was needed, had to really increase in size. Just along the bottom here, we've got some of the finds again, that kind of the archaeological evidence tells us. I mean, we've got the documentary evidence with the maps and the pictures, but these are obviously being found as well out across that area between Newport going towards the west there at the top, perhaps of Forest Road and Parkhurst. So again, the archaeology is showing us that yes, that, you know, these maps are true, because we can see in the archaeology different insignia and things to represent the different regiments that were encamped along there, and that kind of comes from the Isle of Wight history site there, iwhistory.org, which has a really good write-up on all of this stuff as well. So we've got a really thriving town now, and to sort of reflect this, Little London, which is the area of the quay, is so called because it is such a hive of industrial activity. It is called Little London. It's a bustling area to be in, and we've got harbour development there, extending the quay walls. The number of businesses there trying to use that area mean that there's a big expansion. As we move obviously towards the 19th century and the advent of the railways, we've got the railway coming in. We've got better transport links from the rest of the islands, being able to bring goods in as well, again aiding that prosperity of the port and the town itself, with all of those lines of warehouses. So if I'll get my pointer again, so here would have now is the car park to County Hall. It's a very different view yeah, so you know, fortunately they were demolished to make way for that car park. And if we look at the top here, going just around here would have been going into the Quay Arts as well, which obviously does survive. So we do have some idea of what the area would have looked like with that survival there of the Quay Arts Centre. And if you go into the Quay Arts there, they do also have some surviving bits and mechanisms and things as well that kind of give you that idea of the building's history, what's pre-use before it became, you know, what it is now. So yeah, very, very different views down into the harbour now, perhaps not giving away this essence of its name, Little London, perhaps not being reflected in what we see today. So with this expansion, we needed to house these extra workers. So Victorian terraces being built towards the edges of town and it being really expanded. If you think of the town and you think of places like Chapel Street and West Street and New Street and the kind of like southwestern reaches here, they're being built as it's the town is kind of like expanding out and needing to have those extra houses for the workers in this area, but also in the peripheries elsewhere. We've got other sort of terrace houses, Caesars Road, again, that kind of almost quintessential Coronation Street type housing across there. So it's expanding now in terms of its area and its population because of that prosperity. So we're no longer sort of seeing, perhaps towards the end of that period at least, living conditions changing. Those tenements are going at the end of the Victorian period, and the rows of perhaps more neater housing, better housing coming about as well with that expansion. Perhaps a little bit of a check on that, however, is in the 20th century with World War II, Newport did see its fair share of bombing, actually, and Chapel Street was bombed, and the car park that we see there now, the entrance to that, the car park from Chapel Street is actually come about because of bombing, and the houses you can see there now would have actually been kind of go across that whole of that entrance to the car park, but they were destroyed in the war and were not rebuilt. And because of that, quite a lot of these other sort of slum courtyards were demolished because they had suffered so much. And it kind of gave planners an opportunity perhaps to do some replanning and actually think about how or if they were going to rebuild these areas. And how to then also house people that had lost their houses in this process. So we've got new council estates being built to rehouse tenants. Prospect Road at the lower end of South Street behind Morrison's is an example of that. But also, as these kind of communities are taken away, and they were communities as well, we've got here, this is Orchard Street. So now the library is here, along to the bottom here, which is Node Hill School. But this was the street of houses, and if you know the lovely Bill Shepherd, who would tell you about, lots of accounts about how he grew up in Orchard Street, and it was this lovely community backing onto Church Lytton and the apple trees and the orchards that used to grow in the back gardens along there. So it kind of did have an impact on the people themselves, because those communities were no longer there as they were sort of taken out and offered the new housing in the estates as they grew up. So it kind of changed the dynamics there of society in that way. So it was good for them to have this new housing with all the better conditions, but perhaps losing that community spirit. On to sort of the end of the 20th century and the 21st century, and this kind of urban landscape change, quite a big change really. We've lost the railways, and some of these routes have been reused as roads. So the dual carriageway is a well-known example. That was the route of the railways off up to Cowes. The current route that's just being changed, St George's Way, out towards Sandown, again, was originally part of the railway route. We've got changes again happening down in Newport Harbour. It's actually increasingly pressurised in the 20th century from Cowes, as Cowes has grown into that settlement. It's a harbour now, and it's taken away that trade, as ships are not able to, their larger ships are not able to come all the way down the river to Newport, so they're stopping at Cowes, and that trade is lost. And that's why we sort of see now Newport Harbour is that declined area in terms of that bustling centre it was when it was coined Little London. We've got major development, as we know, along South Street. We've got the supermarkets, we've got a bus station, we've got this significantly changed townscape now. It's very definitely a 21st century landscape. But what is interesting is, and really positive, is all of this in a town development, it does keep to the medieval grid lines of that speeds map. And we don't see, if we look at an aerial map of the area, we can still pick out those early grid lines of that early charter that was laid down in the 12th century, and development is sticking to those lines, so we can still kind of trace the steps, as it were, through that. So that's kind of where we are, I guess. It's thinking now, you know, what is next for Newport and its heritage, really. And I think there's lots of possibilities for really positive things going forward. So with the regeneration that is possible in the area, Newport Harbour regeneration, there's the opportunity for some archaeological investigations to perhaps search out some of the early uses of the quay area. So could we perhaps find that early fishing village, that early quay? Is any of it perhaps Roman? Does that kind of fit into anything? And I think that's really important, is that if any, you know, when any development does happen in the area, there is going to be that, because of the rich heritage and the archaeological potential of the area, there is going to be some new archaeological discoveries, and in that way, the local planners are going to take into consideration, when they are doing any developments, this high areas of potential archaeological significance. It's likely that any development will have to have watching brief in its planning recommendations. So the archaeologists will be overseeing any of this development and actually being able to record what's been found. It's also likely that some of the houses in this street grid plan that we do have in Newport, so the 18th and 19th century, thinking sort of perhaps along Pyle Street, it's potential that they could actually be hiding elements of earlier structures underneath their sort of later facades. So it's not unusual to think that there might be perhaps a timber dwelling, or at least a timber framed dwelling, perhaps lurking in the inner walls if any development goes ahead. That might be something that's found as well, and it has been found before, sort of 17th century structures hiding within 19th century outer facades and outer buildings. So I think there's lots of potential there to actually continue to find this story and continue to actually put Newport's heritage at the forefront of everything that we do. So I'm just going to pop up a bibliography there if anybody is wanting to find anything else about Newport. There's lots and lots of stuff out there, and I have given, if you do want to review back through all sorts of different references for you as well to have a look through. So thank you very much for coming along.
All right.
If you have any questions.